One of the favorite kinds of comments that I now sometimes get on my channel is, what camera did you use? What lens did you use for this? How did you make it look so good? As someone who immediately fell in love with cameras and lenses and had this conception of wanting to make his videos feel like movies one day, this has been a huge compliment for me. So in today's video, I'm trying something a little new, which is to talk about the camera gear that I use, the classic what's in my camera bag video, and do a really bad job of being Peter McKinnon.
What's up, everybody?
What's up, everybody? I get the sense that in a lot of tech channels or channels that talk about filmmaking, everyone seems to have an infinite amount of money to spend on gear. I come from the perspective of really thinking through every purchase, spending like 3 or 4 months adding something to my cart, thinking about it, wondering if I really need that piece of gear, and then finally getting it when I have it in mind for a particular video or a particular type of shot that I'm trying to get. So hopefully this video can cover some ground on how you can get great looking footage without breaking the bank too much. Although over 2.5 years, I realized that I did accumulate somewhat of a decent amount of gear. My philosophy with gear is to focus on getting the highest possible quality with speed and to stop worrying about gear or specs right before that diminishing return on gear. If you've ever seen Casey Neistat's video on filmmaking, he talks about how the more you spend on gear, such as a camera body, the higher quality you get. And at first, when you initially spend a certain amount of money, quality goes up through the roof. But there comes a point where quality hockey sticks, especially considering that 60% of all viewership comes off of a cell phone, where the compression of YouTube and the image, you can't even tell the difference between 1080p and 8K. At least for my own process, I realized that there comes a point where you should stop worrying about specs and instead worry about getting a diversity of shot types, various focal lengths, various angles, to get as high of a quality from as many different perspectives as possible so that I can complete a story arc. So without further ado, here's the gear I use based off of my camera body, the lenses I use, lighting, audio, and then my editing software. The main camera I use is the Sony a7 III. It's now only a 2 years old camera, but in all the filmmaking circles, this would be considered a little bit old, a bit outdated, and it's definitely been replaced by the newly released Sony a7S III, which is the camera that I'm saving up for. But I would say that the Sony a7 III is a very high bang for your buck type of camera. It shoots full frame, 4K. It's amazing in low light, and especially considering that we're in Minnesota and winter is coming, we're gonna need low light performance more and more. And I find that as long as there's some kind of street light, even using my cell phone's light to just light up a subject briefly, the a7 III can perform really well in those low light conditions without having too much noise. It's also got really decent autofocus and in-body stabilization, which is vastly important for me because a lot of the shots we get for our videos is through a gimbal and very dynamic. And if you ever need slow-mo footage, which I occasionally do. I used to shoot in slow-mo way more than I do now. Now I'm kind of obsessed with getting everything in real time and getting my shot lengths as long as possible. But if you ever do need that slow-mo footage, you can switch to 120 and it looks buttery smooth. I also have a B cam, a Sony a6-400. This is a crop frame camera. The image that comes out of it is acceptable. On the right lens, it does look pretty great, but the fact that it's crop frame, which means that when I hit record, it just punches in a little bit, and the image somehow looks a little less three-dimensional. There's less pleasing fall off on subjects. I don't know how to describe it, but there's a certain aesthetic to a full frame camera that just looks superior. That being said, our filmmaking style is very run and gun, so sometimes we don't even have time to change out a lens or to reconfigure the settings. So if I need to get a shot really quickly, such as for some footage that we got a few weeks ago, I had to shoot a butterfly that was out there, I'll just pull out the a6-400 and use that. I actually don't know this camera that well. It's really just there if the a7 III is already mounted on my gimbal and I need to quickly switch out a lens and get a quick shot. As I said before, I'm currently saving up for my next Sony body, which is the a7S III. That one's quite expensive, so I'm probably gonna force myself to hold off for like 6 months to a year, but once I make that upgrade, I will retire this camera. Okay, on to the fun stuff, lenses. Lenses, I would say, are more important than the camera body itself. I own 5 lenses. Each was a purchase that I thought about for like 3 or 4 months, and the first lens I ever bought was the 16-35 G Master f2.8. It's extremely expensive. The only reason I bought it, it's a very wide angle vlogging lens. This isn't a filmmaking channel, at least not thus far, so I'm just gonna go over the basics. 16-35 is the focal length. That just shows how wide the image will shoot. So at 16 millimeters, this lens is extremely wide. You can shoot great landscapes with it. Or for a James Bond themed video that Thomas and I had done some time ago, we wanted to show the entire canvas of a tunnel and then show the subject come in and just take over the frame. So for that, this wide lens worked really well. I don't vlog much anymore, but when I did, being able to show the subject and the background around you is very useful. It also is very useful if you want to get dynamic handheld B-roll. For instance, Daniel Schiffer uses this a lot for his handheld type footage, and we've even tried mimicking his style a bit on this channel. channel. If you watch How to Beast, and my analytics say that some of you do watch him, David De La Morenas does all of his vlog style footage on this lens. This is the best lens that money can buy for vlogging, wide angle shooting. Tamron has a lot of great substitutes for Sony lenses that comes at half the price, so you might want to look into that if you're interested in vlogging. Next up is my mid-range lens, and overall one of my favorite lenses, the Tamron 28-75 f2.8. The f2.8 is the aperture on a lens. That basically means how much light is going to come into a lens. Some people have an obsession with getting their background image as blurry as possible so that the subject is sharp, the background is incredibly blurry, and the lower the f-stop, the lower the aperture, such as f1.4, the blurrier the background. I'm not that obsessed with getting a super blurry background, but this is often considered cinematic. But for the most part, since I'm trying to mimic the look of movies, and most movies shoot somewhere between f2.0 and f2.8, a 2.8 lens gives me a sufficiently blurry background. And with this lens, I can shoot subjects incredibly well, especially faces. If I'm ever shooting a sketch, such as a back and forth scene.
No, you have to put them down, but not too far down.
No, because
no.
Or if I need to get macro shots of various objects. Oftentimes I also use this for my talking head videos. Because it's a zoom lens, I have the flexibility to go in and out and just get the exact composition that I want without having to physically move my body. It's one of the best lenses I own, very cost effective, and perhaps the first lens I would recommend if you're getting into videography. I have a Sony 35mm f1.8, which is what I'm shooting on right now. We're shooting it at the lowest aperture setting so that should be a sufficiently blurry background behind me. I consider this my ultimate filmmaking lens, and it was a very careful purchase after watching videos by Brandon Lee, whose run and gun filmmaking style is something that I strive to emulate. I think he's absolutely brilliant. This is the lens that I always put on my gimbal because it's so light. A lot of movie directors, especially the directors I admire, shoot at a focal length of 35mm, and the combination of that f1.8 very low aperture, it makes for a very dramatic, dynamic, cinematic combo. And for videos like my genre series or the more recent director parody series, it's the lens that we have mounted on my gimbal most often. Because the lens is so light and yet so dynamic, it works really well on a gimbal. The problem with shooting on a gimbal is that you can get tired after a few hours, so having light gear is super important and often neglected. A problem with shooting that a lot of people tend to ignore because they're so obsessed with image quality is weight. It's ideal to have your setup small and light so that you can shoot inside restaurants or go for longer periods of time, or just generally speaking, be kind of ninja about how you're getting shots so that you can quickly just get something and then just move on. If you want to get dynamic shots on a gimbal, or relatively speaking, make your videos look like a movie without breaking the bank, this is my second favorite lens and the one that I would recommend next. I ended up buying my first telephoto lens from Tamron, this 70-180 f2.8. I'm a big fan of Tamron. For a recent video in which I attempted to mimic the style of Quentin Tarantino, and especially those rapid Hong Kong zoom-ins that he does in his movies, this is a lens that was sitting in my shopping cart for like 4 months. I would look at it and then think to myself, you know what, I don't need a telephoto lens. We can make it happen otherwise. But until we needed to make that video and especially get that specific type of shot, that's when I went ahead and purchased this one. What I really love about shooting at those really high focal lengths is that you can get into a subject without being super close. So if you ever want to get creeper footage like Nathaniel Drew, getting footage of random people walking around and stuff, but you don't want to be right up in their face, you should get a telephoto lens for that. The problem with telephoto lenses, of course, is that they're among the most expensive. If you were to buy Sony's telephoto lens, it'd be like $2,400 or something like that. So Tamron is the budget filmmaker's friend. It comes at around half the price. And I've been incredibly happy with its results. At 180mm, we can shoot a subject who is decently far away and get this compressed look. Like the background looks very blurred while still showing the entire subject in the foreground, which is just something that's really hard to do with like a 35mm. On something like that, you end up just shooting head and shoulders rather than a full body. And if you ever do pull back enough, it sort of loses that movie look. The background doesn't look sufficiently blurry. I've also found this lens really helpful when doing things like shooting into a computer screen or into my cell phone. If I want to get words from a screen, that's something that I can use this lens really well for. And as a occasional personal development YouTuber, that's actually pretty important to be able to shoot into screens to show that I'm typing, that I'm working, that I'm a productive member of society and someone you should be learning from. In the past, those shots have been really difficult to get, so I'm glad I picked up this lens for that purpose. I have one last lens, a Sony 85mm f1.8. It's the one that I use the least amount for video, but 85mm is considered very flattering on faces. It's a very common focal length for portrait photography, and if I ever need to look mildly sexy for Instagram pictures, then this is the lens that we'll use. It's also the lens that I use a decent amount to shoot thumbnail photos, and that's the main function that this lens serves for me. At an aperture of 1.8, you get a lot of bokeh in the background, which is like those soft diffuse lights that are blurry behind a subject that a lot of photographers are obsessed with. I rarely get video footage off of this lens, but it's pretty light, so if we've ever felt experimental, we just throw this up on the gimbal and you can get some really weird telephoto-ish gimbal movement shots, such as some of these shots that we use for the kitchen piece based off my genre series. That's it for lenses. Before moving on to lighting, audio, stabilizers, I'm gonna take a minute to talk about today's video sponsor, Fubo TV. If you're one of the 80 million Americans who are fed up with paying high cable prices and dealing with shady cable companies, there's finally an alternative that gives you the cable TV experience at half the price. It's called Fubo TV. Fubo TV comes with over 100 of your favorite channels, including complete coverage of all your favorite sports, with all local broadcasters, all major sports league networks, NFL, Red Zone, ESPN, ABC, CBS, and more. And you can stream select games in 4K. Plus, you can record your favorite games and shows on Fubo TV's cloud DVR and watch anywhere on any device. Other streaming services can't compete with the breadth of entertainment that comes with Fubo TV and comes in at half the cost of cable. Fubo TV is the best option for cord cutters everywhere. It's easy to try, it takes just 2 minutes to sign up and start streaming all of your favorite cable channels. There's no cable box required, and you can sign up for free and cancel anytime. No hassles, no gotchas. Sign up for a risk-free 7-day free trial of Fubo TV and get 15% off of your first month by going to FuboTV.com/Captain Sinbad. That's FuboTV.com/Captain Sinbad to start your free trial and get 15% off of your first month of Fubo TV. FuboTV.com/Captain Sinbad. It's sponsors like Fubo TV that make it possible for us to pursue some of these higher efforts, more production-heavy videos, like videos from the genre series or the director parody series, or some upcoming short films. They help me pay for other actors, book locations. For the next video in the genre series, based off of lessons from the military, we're actually renting a helicopter for an hour, and we simply wouldn't be able to make videos like that without a sponsor. So thank you, Fubo TV, for sponsoring this video. All right, let's move on to stabilizers. My main gimbal is the Zhiyun Weebill S. This is one of the smallest gimbals on the market, and it is fantastic. There are newer gimbals out there now that are updated that can handle a heavier payload, but the main thing that people forget with gimbals is that they get heavy really fast, especially if you're gonna put on a big lens on them. And being light and mobile while trying to get dynamic footage is really important. When getting something like a tracking shot or just any dynamic movement, oftentimes the key is not video quality, but just repeating a movement over and over until you end up getting the shot you want. It's practice, it's iteration. And you need to be able to have a setup that gets great footage, but also one that you don't get tired of holding. The Weebill S is one of the smallest gimbals on the market, and I couldn't recommend it more. It can still handle a pretty decent payload, but I don't even try to go for more heavy setups on it. I specifically bought a very light 35mm lens so that I can use my A7 III and the Weebill and that lens to get what I consider a very dangerous combo. In the same vein, I also use the DJI Osmo Mobile 3 a decent amount. This is a gimbal for your cell phone, and I would say it's highly underutilized in the filmmaking community. Since everyone's trying to go for cinema cameras or downgraded 6K, 8K footage, people forget that your cell phone can shoot 4K and actually get very fantastic video quality on a setup that is insanely light. For the recent Tarantino video, we got this shot off of my cell phone on the Osmo. It's beautiful, but I think we need to have a 40-minute drawn-out conversation in which we build a lot of tension.
All right, what do you want to talk about?
How are you so good looking? If I ever need something ridiculously dynamic, almost comically dynamic, then I'll just have my subject turn around in one direction while I spin around them like a helicopter in the other, and you get this really cool Michael Bay style footage. My current drone is the Mavic Air 2. It's awesome. I still have the original Mavic Air, but for some reason I could never get video quality that was just good enough, and it took a really long time to calibrate, to get my cell phone inside the controller. And then once you finally did get it up, you only got like 18 minutes of flight time, which I'm not that amazing at using a drone right now, so having a little bit more flight time, like 31 minutes on the Mavic Air 2, is super helpful. I also learned from previous mistakes and bought 4 batteries so I can get the footage I need in any location. Currently the best, most cinematic drone on the market is the Mavic 2 Pro, but it's almost double the cost. And with a drone, you know you're eventually gonna crash it. And at least for me, I really can't tell that much of a visual difference between the Pro and the Air 2. So I just went with the Air 2 with the knowledge that one day I'll eventually have to replace it, and I can because I spent half the money on it. For editing, I use a 2020 MacBook Pro with a 1TB SSD. I also have a couple 4TB external hard drives by Seagate. It's content creators like Daniel Schiffer that made me realize how important lighting is. And for my lighting needs, I use the Aperture 120D on a Light Dome Mini. Especially when shooting sketch scenes, we like to have the setup top down on a subject while using my second lighting source, the newest edition, this Falcon Eyes light stand to light up my actors. This is what the setup looks like. I also have this tiny RGB light, which is casting this teal light behind me that I might throw up against a the wall if I want like a colorful tint in a video. Audio. For talking heads, audio is the singular most important thing, well, among the most important things that you could get, and it's one of those things that new content creators neglect the most. I use a Rode NT4 and it externally records to a Zoom H5. I literally just copied the setup that Daniel Schiffer has, and it's definitely improved my audio quality a decent amount. I would say that this combo, the NT4 to the Zoom 5, is like the peak quality that you can get at this price point. You can improve audio still beyond this point, but then it gets drastically more expensive. So I would say that this is a good ROI. This is still prior to that threshold of price to quality. And that covers it. If you've been a filmmaker for a long period of time, then you might roll your eyes at my gear and think that it's really basic or rudimentary. Or you might see my level of knowledge about filmmaking as almost naive. And I will admit, I'm definitely not one of the knowledgeable ones right now, but I am striving to get better. And if you're completely new to all this, just as I was 2 years ago, then it might seem very overwhelming, very expensive, out of your budget. I can say that I completely understand that sentiment. I bought my A7 III just a year ago, and it was a real pinch on my bank account. I was really thinking about that purchase for a long time, thinking, oh no, maybe I should just shoot on a cheaper camera for a longer period of time. But I have found that if you're passionate about this and if you're serious about getting better, then it is important to invest in gear when possible, saving up money and buying the next purchase carefully, methodically, when you're ready for it, and also doing your best to learn more about your camera each day. Learn the settings so that even if you do have a $300 or $400 camera to start, trust me when I say you can go a long ways with that camera. You can make it look very beautiful and cinematic if you're patient and you keep studying. I made my first 40 videos off of my cell phone, and then after a year and a half, I finally bought that full frame camera, and then each lens or drone or light has been the result of months of reflection. I only bought this recent drone when I knew I needed it for aerial shots for my Christopher Nolan video. I bought the telephoto lens because I knew I needed it for the Tarantino vid. And more than the gear, I'm interested in focusing on what that gear can do for me. I emphasize script, story, the joke, the storyboard. You can make amazing things with your cell phone if your script is good enough, and you can get 1 million people to watch. So anyway, the rant is over. Thanks for watching this one. Greatness is coming, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.